All right, so let's go ahead and finalize this application. And therefore, I'm going to go very quickly over the user interface because it's a very generic user interface. You can see we have a text view with an edit text. We have another text view with another edit text next to it. Then we have this button. We have a text view, and underneath we have this recycler view. Okay, so we're using a recycler view. This is a scrollable view here. You can see it when you add enough items, you will see it even better, but you can even see it from the animation. And then we have this little item UI. So this item UI has one text view, which is the name, another text view with a little bit of distance, which is the email ID. Then we have one button and a second button, which is more like an image view. Okay, so we're going to use an image view here instead of a button, but it's going to behave like a button. So that's generally the user interface. You can try to build this yourself. You will need to use an item adapter for it. So this individual entry here is an item. So you will need to create an adapter that allows you to store all of these information. So I'm going to go over these parts of the video very quickly because we want to focus specifically on the room aspects of it, because everything else we have covered in the course so far. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So first of all, what we need to do is we need to, of course, change the main activity XML file. And I'm just going to paste in my code real quick and go over it just very briefly. So generally speaking, this is the user interface that we have. You see, we have this no records available, by the way. Also, this is a text view that will only be visible if we have no entries in our database. And there you see, so we have this text view, then the edit text, text view, edit text button, text view, and recycler view. Okay, so I'm using a constraint layout with this text view. You can, by the way, also just download the XML file. I would recommend to do that so that you don't have to type all of that stuff in, even though you could use this as a little challenge for yourself. So here I'm using an edit text instead of this entire edit text layout stuff that surrounds it, because I don't have a specific UI style here. I'm keeping it simple, just using this edit text. Then we have this other text view with the edit text, which is just next to the text view email label. So you see here start to end of. That's how you can get this thing where you see that the text view is on the left of the edit text. And then underneath we have this button, which has the ID of button add. Then we have this text view, which just says all the inserted records, which is this bold text that you can see here, which is the top of it is at the bottom of the button. And then we have our recycler view, which is just underneath the text view name. And then finally, we have this text view, which is only visible if there are no records available, which is at the bottom of the button add. Okay. So that's pretty much the user interface. And as I said, we also need to make sure that we have the individual items. Okay, so this item here, you see text view, image view. So all next to each other. So let's go ahead and look over how this is going to look like. So I'm going to import it here. This is going to be how my row looks like. You can see it's pretty empty because there are no images here, because I also need to add the drawables. So you can download, you can use your own drawables, but I'm just going to use those ones that you see here. So the edit icon as well as the delete icon, like so. Okay, so now we have those two images here. You see edit and delete. We have a text view and a text view. And how does this look like? Well, I'm using a linear layout to keep it simple here. Items are oriented horizontally, so right next to each other, not on top of each other. We have a text view, another text view, another text view, which is, well, this text view is just a colon. If you ever want to have it in there, you see name, colon, email. And then we have the two image views. So one image view being our edit image view, and then the image view that is the delete image view. And then we have this little dialog that pops up when we want to edit something. So you see update record is the text view at the top. Then we have another text view. This is an edit text, another text view with another edit text. And then we have two buttons here at the bottom, which one says update and the other one says cancel. Okay, so we need to design this as well. You can try this, of course, yourself and pause the video, but otherwise, let me just quickly put it in here. So I'm going to call this one dialog update. and this is going to be the code. So I'm using a constraint layout once again with a text view, which is this title thingy. So let's look over it. It's this update record text view. So let me make it a little bigger here on the side. Okay, update record. Then we have this text view, which says name, which is next to this enter name edit text. You see here, they are connected to each other. So start to end of TV name label. Then we have this text view, which is underneath this other one, but next to the edit text, which is the enter email edit text, which is this one here. And then we have this update button, which is also a text view. I'm using a text view here, and then this cancel button. But either way, you could have also just used buttons here. Either way would have been fine. And that's pretty much it. Okay, so now that we have the user interface out of the way, let's add some room code. So first of all, we need to find a way to add a record, because otherwise we don't have anything to be displayed on the screen, right? And we don't store anything in the database. So if you don't have anything that you can retrieve or edit, then you cannot work with the database. So you need to add something first. So let's go ahead and create a function add record here, which is going to be requiring an employee DAO. Okay, so we need to pass the DAO that we want to work with. And now we can use view binding, and therefore we need to set up a binding object here at the very top. Let's make sure we have that. So I'm just going to use the activity main binding, set it to null by default as always, and then let's set up the binding and content view here accordingly. We've done that multiple times in the course already. So activity main binding inflate using the layout inflator and setting the root as the content view. Okay, now we can use view binding in our add record method. And why do we need that? Well, because in order to add something, we need to get the data that has been entered. Okay, so here, this data as well as this data needs to be gotten, as well as we need to add an on-click listener to this add record button. So let's get the name first, which will be using our binding object dot edit text name and get its text property as a string. Okay, to string. Okay, and then we need to do the same thing with the email. So here binding again, we get the edit email ID or edit text email ID, and here we get the text from it to string. Okay, now we can check if both of them aren't empty. So if email is not empty, and double the and sign here, the name is not empty, and maybe we should do it the other way around. Email is not empty. Here this should be name. Just because of the order of how we created the variables, it doesn't really matter, but just for the looks of it. So if both of this is the case, so both aren't empty, then we can insert the data. So we can take this name and we can take this email and use our DAO to insert something. But because this has to be done in the background, so we need to use coroutine content here, we are going to say that we want to use the lifecycle scope for that. So we're launching our coroutine. Okay, so here you need to import launch, which will then be available up here. So we see lifecycle scope and coroutines launch have been both added to our namespaces up there. And now we can use the employee DAO that has been passed to this add record method in order to call its insert method. So if you recall, we had this insert method, the suspend fun insert, which is a coroutine function, which we are now calling inside of the lifecycle scope. And here we can now pass the data. And what is it that we need to pass? Well, we need to pass an employee entity object. So let's go ahead and create an employee entity object like so, where we can pass the ID, but we can also skip it because it's set by default and auto incremented because it is, if we look at it, it is the primary key. So it will be auto generated. We don't need to manually set the ID. So the only thing we need to set is going to be the name and the email. So let's set those two things. Now we can also set up a text letting people know that the record was saved. And then while we're at it, and by the way, I'm using the application context here, not just this, because we are inside of this scope, okay? Otherwise, if you just use this, you can run into errors. You see, this will not work. So we need to pass in the application context. And then I can clear the entry. So you see, if I enter Dennis here and some email address, and I add the record, you see that those two fields are being emptied after. So let's just do that real quick by using binding.editTextName. And let's use the text property, which could be nullable as well, and clear it. Okay, and now do the same thing with our email. So here, email ID, text clear. Okay, and then if those two are not empty, so if either of those two entry fields, so edit text, is empty, which means the variables that we have here are going to be empty, then we can just display a toast saying email or name cannot be blank, or name or email cannot be blank. Okay, and now before we can test this, let's actually execute this add record method at the point when we click on the button. Okay, so we need to make sure that we implement the button, otherwise, of course, nothing will work. Okay, and now we need to call this add record method once we click on the button, right? So let's do that, but the problem will be, we will see in a second, that we don't have an employee DAO that we can pass to it, at least not in the format that we need it yet. So let's use our binding button add set on click listener here in order to get started. So here we can then call the add record and we can pass an employee DAO. But where do we get the employee DAO from? Well, that's the thing, we don't have it yet. So we need to pass an employee DAO to our add record method. So here to do call add record with employee DAO. Okay, so how do we set up this employee DAO? Therefore, we're going to create an application class and initialize the database. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that real quick here. New and class. I'm going to call this one employee app. And it will just be a class and it will inherit from application. So it will be an application class now. And here inside of it, we can create a DB lazily using our employee database dot get instance, and we need to pass this, which means this employee app application. Okay, so now we have this database that we can use. For every application class, we must declare the app that we have set up in the Android manifest as well. So let's go over to the Android manifest, and I know it gets more and more tricky, but that's just how it's done. So now we can add the Android name property and use our employee app here with a dot at the beginning here. So dot employee app, and now it will use our employee app, which we can now set up in our main activity. So here, let's set up our employee DAO using our employee app. So employee DAO will be with our application as employee app, this one here, dot get its database object and use the employee DAO, which is this abstract function that we created inside of our room database. All right. So what is going on here? Because this one line, there's so much stuff going on in one line. Let me go over to the activity. So what we need is, we need an employee DAO to add a record, right? Otherwise we cannot store the data, because we need to use the DAO in order to call its insert method, which needs an employee entity, which we do have, but we don't have the DAO itself yet. So we need to have access to the DAO. In order to get access to the DAO, we need to set up an application, which we just did here, an application class. And then we can set up the database in there to now have our database ready. So here we are creating it lazily, which means that it loads the needed value to our variable whenever it is needed. So not directly, but only when it's needed. Okay, so that's the point about this lazy here. And the database will then be the instance of our employee database that we have, because we can only have one instance, as we have covered in the last video. So we have this companion object where we had this instance, get instance method, which is a singleton that only exists once in the entire application. So there's only one instance of this instance object at once. Okay, so there's only one database in the entire application. So now we can go ahead and get this instance by passing this as the application. So because the get instance needs a context, and we're passing the application context as the context, and we need to set up the application accordingly inside of our application tag of our Android manifest. So not inside of an activity or anything, because we are not using the database only in this activity, we're using the database in the entire application. And now in the main activity, we can go ahead and get the DAO from the database. So we need to get the application in order to get this DB object that we just created, which gets us the database. And then we can get its employee DAO, which is this abstract function. So the database that we're creating is our employee database, which is a room database, which we had set up, okay? So at this point, we have our DAO and we can pass the DAO. So let's call the add record method and pass the employee DAO to it. So now our application will know which DAO to use in order to use the insert method, which will take an employee entity with a name and an email and will store that in our application. So quite a bit of stuff that you need to build around it, quite a bit of boilerplate code. But the thing is, this is quite safe. So this is a safe approach. You have to set it up once, but then from now on, it's going to be significantly easier. So once you wrap your head around this, it's just going to be significantly easier, because now you can just use the DAO that you have there and you can call its methods. Because the DAO, if you look at it, it has all of the methods that we need for CRUD operations. So create, read, update, and delete. Okay, so we have all the CRUD operations here. And now let's actually run the application. Because what we will see is that here in this app inspection, here there's a tab at the bottom, and this app inspection has a database inspector. So now if I run the application and add an entry here, so let me add myself again, Dennis, with Dennis at email or at info.com. And now let's add the record. And you will see that the database inspector has made a change. So it added this employee database and it has this employee table. Once you click into it, you will see the entries, and let me make it a little bigger here. You see we have the ID 1, which is Dennis, with the email ID of Dennis at info.com. So now let's try this again with Frank, and Frank at tank.com. We add the record, and the record will be added to our database. Let me refresh it. We see here 2, so ID is 2, Frank at tank.com is in our database as well. So this is inside of our employee database, inside of the employee table. Okay, so everything now is set up. We're using our employee database. We're using the employee entity, which contains the employee table. So that's exactly the name that you see here. Okay, so this is where we defined the table name. And now you see the table name, so in here, with all of its columns. So these are the properties, and you see this is the primary key, which contains this key here as well. So if you look at it, you can see here primary key, which was the integer, which we called ID. And then we have the name and we have the email. But the email internally was called email ID. So if you look at it, you see like in the table, it's called email ID, even though the name that we are using for our objects and to pass data to our objects and stuff is going to be email. So in the code, we're using email, but the actual column name is email ID, as you see here. So we overrode that using this add column info where we passed a different name. Okay, so this is pretty much how you can set it up. You can also see, by the way, that here this is an integer, this is a text property. So in the database internally, it uses different names for the different data types that we have. So it doesn't use int, it uses integer, like a full name. It doesn't use string, it uses text. So SQL uses different wording here. So that's pretty much it for how to add a record. But in the next video, we're going to finalize the application, because this is just going to be the beginning of it. As you see, it's quite a long video already. So see you in the next one.